Well, hello and welcome to this episode of On the Spot, the coffee break shaped episode discussing all things related to business analysis, business change, and everything in between. I'm really pleased to say that today we are joined by Kathy Berkidge, sort of agile and business analysis trainer, coach, speaker, many other things besides. So, Kathy, thanks very much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Adrian. Great to be here.
And today we're going to be talking about stakeholder engagement because as business analysts, we all work with stakeholders every single day, probably remotely at the moment for many of us, in person sometimes. And we hear this term stakeholder engagement bandied about a lot. So my first question for you, Kathy, is what does stakeholder engagement really mean?
Well, if you ask 5 different BAs, they'll tell you 5 different things. But for me, it's really about, dare I say, it's not meant to be a process step by step, but it is a process where we plan, analyse, execute, and review the way that we work with other people, otherwise known as stakeholders. So we want them to support us and be prepared to contribute and be willing to talk to us about their needs, their acceptance criteria, or what in fact is important for them. So we want them to be willing to work with us. So when we do stakeholder engagement, it's really about that way that we plan and also prepare ourselves to be able to work well with them so they are engaged and, of course, bought into the work that we're doing.
Yeah, it's so crucial to have that buy-in, isn't it? To actually, sort of understand them and for them to understand, where we're sort of heading. I should say before we go any further, if you are watching live, do feel free to add a comment in the chat. We'll bring a few comments up, and you can ask a question or whatever, and we'll bring that up on screen as they come along. If you do submit a comment and we bring it up on screen, it will have your name and photo against it. So do of course be aware of that. But it's always lovely to see who's tuned in. So, Kathy, we've talked about stakeholder engagement and what it means. I'm sure what many people watching will be thinking is, but how do we achieve that? So do you have any tips for engaging better with stakeholders?
Well, it really starts with understanding them and their needs and understanding how their communication style and what's important for them meshes with our communication style and where we go about our work. So there needs to be a real meeting of the worlds so we can understand how best we can understand and relate to one another.
Yeah, definitely. So that mutual understanding is really, really important. And I see Jason and Mohammed are tuned in. So morning to both of you. Great that you could tune in. So one thing I know we've talked about in the past, Kathy, is the Stakeholder Engagement Canvas. And when I first saw this was one of those tools that just really, really resonated with me. It was a tool that I thought, yes, this is like the thinking tool that I've been looking for to think about different approach or different aspects of a stakeholder engagement. I was wondering if you could briefly talk us through that.
Sure. Let me see if I can share my screen. And I'm not sure how well this is going to work because I think I've got a bit of a tech problem going on, and I do. Oh, no. I'm frozen. Oh, no, here we go. And maybe this is going to work now. I've tried something else. It's doing something weird.
No. At least this one knows it's live.
There it goes. No, technology is great when it works. Sorry about that. It was doing something strange. My monitor, I thought it was not working. So the Canvas, again, when I think about my stakeholder engagement processes, I always think of, we've got the power interest matrix and our race here, we've got onion diagrams, and we've got a few other really great tools, but it doesn't let me really get in the heads and the hearts of my stakeholders. And we work with Lean Canvas, we work with Business Model Canvas, we work with all sorts of different canvases. So I thought, wouldn't that be great if we could have a way to really structure our thinking in the same way that the Lean Canvas does? So the Stakeholder Engagement Canvas is really that way for us to brainstorm our own thoughts around our stakeholder engagement process. So it gives us that deeper level of stakeholder analysis beyond what you just do on a RACI or a power interest. So it's got the nine segments, just like the other canvases do, starting with understanding them. What's their world? What are they? Who are they? Who are they in the world, and what are they thinking? What are their requirements from me as well as the project? Not to be mistaken with their objectives, i.e., what does success look like in their eyes? We need to understand in the middle the context of the work that we're doing together. What is the world around us like? Are we going to be doing interviews? Are we going to be doing, what is the nature of the work we're doing? And again, what are those interactions we're planning to have? So beyond just a comms plan, which we often see about, how frequently we're going to email, what is the real nature of those interactions? And then, of course, what is the outcome? So when we're working with them, what are their expectations of the outcome of our engagement, and what am I expecting as well? The last column on the right-hand side is about me. Because when we think about our stakeholders, we always have some sort of perhaps bias or judgment of what we've heard before, what we've seen before. Perhaps there's history behind the engagement process. So we really kind of delve deeper within ourselves to say, what perceptions and ideas do I have about this stakeholder? Because the first sections are really about them, but now we start thinking about how I'm thinking, because perhaps we did a project last year with them and something happened and we're now thinking, I'm dreading being with them. And that can really off-put us. So if we can identify it, we can kind of work with it and bash it around a little bit and say, how am I going to work with this so I'm not sabotaging my engagement with them, and I'm able to kind of get past it. So we need to think about, this is where my mindfulness stuff comes in, is I really need to sit and think, what am I really thinking about them? Am I coming in with an open slate and really open and aware to really listen to them? Or have I got all that history going on in my mind, which means I'm going to shut things down, which is terrible for stakeholder engagement. The bottom level of the canvas really talks about the risks. Where do I see potential confusion or conflict? Because now that we've understood them, now that we've sort of looked at what we're thinking, what could go wrong? Just like any risk, it's a potential problem. And then the last part is, now that we've got all this information together, what am I going to do to ensure that stakeholder engagement works successfully for this stakeholder and the way I am and the way that they are, so we can really do that analysis. And of course, it doesn't mean we shouldn't ignore the RACI or the power interest or even the attitude types of scale that we might analyse in traditional stakeholder engagement tools. So we can do this for one stakeholder, we could do it perhaps for a stakeholder group. And in fact, maybe it's a team trying to think about how a team's going to engage with a stakeholder. Perhaps we're a product owner engaging other stakeholders in the business. So it can be used one-on-one, many to many, one to many, one many to one, all those different permutations of the ERD diagrams as well.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really interesting. And I look at this tool and see it as such a practical thinking tool. It's like it gives us the questions to ask, and as you say, it builds upon. It doesn't contradict. It builds upon other approaches like the stakeholder onion, the stakeholder rainbow, the power interest grid, all of those types of things. So we have a question from Jason. And Jason asks, what's the best way, in your opinion, to analyse stakeholders' communication styles? Do you use something like a user manual, or ask stakeholders directly, or learn as you go, or maybe something else? Really great question, because people do have, if I think I've worked with some people who you've got to draw it for them. There's no point sending them chunks of text, they just won't read it. And I've worked with other people who, if you send them a diagram, they're like, what's this? Like if you can't send it to me in 100-page, not 100-page, but if you can't send it to me in a list with every paragraph that's numbered, I don't want to read it, type of thing. So any tips on that, Kathy?
I really like the user manual concept. I really enjoy that. If we've got that workplace where people are writing their own user manuals and sharing it to their communities, that's fantastic. But it does take a bit of getting outside of our own head and really being open to listening. So we need to talk to them and say and see if we can figure out how are they. So when we think about what are their responsibilities, how much time do they have to give, perhaps other cues might indicate whether they're more of a chatty kind of person versus someone who just wants the executive summary versus that person who really wants to be analytical about things, really wants to let things sit for a day and really think, that real person who. So we need to, dare I say, do our research. So I think it's really important to try to see without having perceptions or just somebody else has told us, we need to go out and find out what is their comm style like. So you've got many of those tools, which all of them I appreciate, but you can't make them do a disc analysis. So finding ways where you can pick up on, hey, I think they're going to be more assertive, or maybe they're going to be more reflective. That means we're going to have to build a relationship with them, at least to start off with, to start forming an idea of their preferred communication style.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really tricky question, but I love the idea of that user manual as well. But as you say, having that culture that supports it. So Kathy, what would be your biggest tip or takeaway for BAs that are thinking about different or additional ways of fostering stakeholder engagement?
There's so many different tips, but for me, the number one that stands out above all is being present. Absolutely being present. People say to me often that I really feel heard, regardless of what they're saying, no matter how pressured they might be or stressed about the current project or their own work, just to give them that space and that time and that presence where they can articulate what's really going on for them beyond what do you need of this requirement, but really being present. And of course, being present requires us to listen. And I mean, really listen, dropping our own thoughts and that inner voice. And so for me, being mindful about the way that we're listening or perhaps not listening.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because actually, I think it's easy to assume that listening is something that is a natural skill, but I think it's something we're all constantly learning. And in today's world where there are so many distractions, it's really easy to not really listen, and so people don't necessarily feel heard. So fantastic. Well, I'm sure, in fact, I know we could talk about this topic for much, much longer, Kathy, but we're coming to the end of our 15-minute slot. So I am certain people will want to follow you, stay in touch with you, know more about what you do. How's the best way for people to connect with you, find out more?
Well, easiest way is, of course, on LinkedIn. There's only one Kathy Berkidge in the world, and that's me, apparently. So find me, Kathy, Berkidge. Please link in with me. That's number one. You can go to www.mindatworkconsulting.com.au. Yes, I'm in Australia. And of course, there's all sorts of random pop-ups that will happen all over the place between, of course, Blackmetric's website and some of the courses and seminars that we'll be doing together in the future too. So just stay tuned to both Blackmetric and of course LinkedIn. So link in with me, keep an eye out, and please feel free to send me a connection request and let me know what you're thinking.
Yeah, definitely. So I do keep an eye, because Kathy and I do have a workshop planned up our sleeve with a date to be announced. So, well, very, very thank you to everyone who tuned in live. I can see there are more comments coming in now, which is fantastic. But we are out of time. So thank you for tuning in live and or watching the recording. And a massive thank you, Kathy, because I think it's late evening your time, is it? Or
It's just on 6:30 at night. So it's
Okay, not too late, like reasonably social time. So fantastic. So well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and see you again soon. So
Thanks,
bye for now.
Adrian. Have a great day.